The morning started like any other in our suburban Boston home. September had just begun, bringing with it that distinct New England chill that signaled the end of summer. I woke up earlier than usual, careful not to disturb Mark as I slipped out of bed. Our bedroom had become less of a sanctuary and more of a battleground lately, and I preferred the quiet solitude of dawn to the tension that filled the room when we were both awake. I padded down to the kitchen, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floors. The house was still, peaceful in a way it never was when Mark was around. I started the coffee maker, watching as the dark liquid dripped steadily into the pot, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. There was something comforting about these small morning rituals, the only part of my day I could truly call my own. I heard the shower running upstairs as I prepared breakfast. Nothing fancy, just some toast and eggs. Mark liked his toast barely warmed and his eggs over easy. After 7 years of marriage, these details had become second nature, even as everything else between us had changed. When he came downstairs, freshly showered and dressed in his usual crisp button-down and slacks, I could feel the shift in the air. Mark had that look on his face, the one that always preceded an argument or a demand. He sat across from me at our kitchen island, not saying good morning, not acknowledging the breakfast I'd prepared. Instead, he scrolled through his phone, a smug half-smile playing on his lips. "Coffee?" I offered, trying to keep my voice light. He nodded without looking up. I placed his mug in front of him, careful not to spill. My hands had developed a slight tremor over the past year. Another small change I tried to hide from him. "Sarah," he finally said, still not looking up from his phone. "I need your credit card." I paused, the bite of toast halfway to my mouth. "What for?" Now he looked up, his blue eyes cold and calculating. "Mom needs a new car. Her Lexus is almost 3 years old, and she saw a new model she wants." I carefully set my toast down on my plate. Mark's mother, Eleanor, lived in a sprawling house in Cambridge that Mark paid the mortgage on. She'd never worked a day in her life and treated me like an inconvenience since the day we met. Last Christmas, she'd accidentally spilled red wine on the white cashmere sweater I'd received from my sister, then suggested I should dress more appropriately for family gatherings. "Mark, we talked about this," I said quietly. "Our finances are tight right now, especially after the renovation. The renovation he'd insisted on for a home gym he used maybe twice a month." "So?" His tone was dismissive. "It's just a car. Put it on your card. The one with the high limit. That card is almost maxed out from the last time your mother needed something," I reminded him. "And we agreed we'd discuss large purchases together." He scoffed, taking a sip of his coffee. "It's not a discussion, Sarah. I'm telling you what's happening." I felt something shift inside me then, a quiet resolve forming beneath years of compliance. "No," I said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's expression didn't change at first, and that was almost worse than immediate anger. He set his mug down with deliberate slowness. "What did you just say?" I said no. "We can't afford it, Mark. And frankly, your mother can buy her own car." His face contorted then, transforming from cold indifference to rage in seconds. Without warning, he grabbed his coffee mug and threw the contents directly at my face. The scalding liquid hit my cheek and neck, and I cried out, more from shock than pain at first. But then the burning sensation spread across my skin like wildfire. "Either give me the card or get out of this house," he snarled, standing up so abruptly that his stool toppled over behind him. "This is my house, my rules, and if you can't respect that, you can leave." I couldn't speak through the pain. Hot tears mixed with coffee streamed down my face as I pressed a kitchen towel to my burning skin. Through blurred vision, I saw Mark standing over me, his expression a mixture of disgust and triumph. "Well?" he demanded. "Okay," I whispered, the word barely audible. He took it as surrender, as he always did. With a satisfied nod, he straightened his tie, grabbed his briefcase from the counter, and headed for the door. "I'll be home late," he called over his shoulder. "Have dinner ready by 8, and call the bank to increase your credit limit." The front door slammed shut, followed by the sound of his BMW starting in the driveway. I stayed frozen at the kitchen island, the damp towel still pressed to my face. In the sudden silence, I could hear the wall clock ticking and the refrigerator humming. Ordinary sounds in what had just become an extraordinary moment. because in that single, painful instant, I'd made a decision. The okay I'd whispered wasn't agreement. It was acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that this marriage, this life I'd been enduring rather than living, was over. I looked around the kitchen, at the breakfast dishes, the coffee splattered across the counter, the life I'd carefully constructed around Mark's needs and demands. 7 years of shrinking myself to fit into the corners he allowed me to occupy. 7 years of watching the woman I used to be fade like a photograph left too long in the sun. I touched my cheek gently, wincing at the tenderness. It would blister, I knew that much. Another mark to add to the invisible collection I'd been gathering. But this one felt different. This one felt like permission. I stood up and walked to the window, watching as Mark's car disappeared around the corner. For the first time in years, I felt something other than fear or resignation. I felt certain. I had until evening to decide exactly how I would do it. But one thing was already clear. By the time the sun set, I would be gone. Outside, a cardinal landed on the bird feeder I'd hung despite Mark's complaints about the mess. It was bright red against the gray morning, vivid, alive, free. I watched it for a moment, then turned away to begin planning my escape. The moment I heard Mark's car pull out of the driveway, something shifted inside me. The burning on my face was nothing compared to the fire now lit in my chest. I rushed to the bathroom, flipping on the harsh fluorescent light to assess the damage. My right cheek and part of my neck were angry red, already starting to blister in places where the coffee had been hottest. I ran a washcloth under cold water and pressed it gently to my skin, wincing at the contact. My reflection stared back at me, a woman I barely recognized anymore. Thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes, and that perpetual look of someone bracing for impact. When had I become this person? Where was the Emily who'd graduated top of her class at Emerson College, who'd traveled to London and Paris on her own, who'd once told a handsy boss exactly where he could put his wandering hands? I knew exactly when. It happened so gradually that I never saw it coming. A criticism here, a helpful suggestion there. Small corrections to my appearance, my opinions, my very existence until I became this hollow version of myself. The woman in the mirror wasn't me. She was Mark's creation, his perfectly molded wife who still somehow never measured up. Not anymore. I pulled my old duffel bag from the back of the closet, the one I'd used on camping trips with my college friends before Mark had deemed such activities beneath us. The sturdy canvas felt right in my hands, practical, unpretentious, everything Mark hated. I began filling it methodically, grabbing only essentials: jeans, t-shirts, underwear, my most comfortable shoes. I left the designer clothes Mark had insisted I wear, the uncomfortable heels, the restrictive dresses. In the bathroom, I gathered my toothbrush, basic toiletries, and the prescription medication I'd been on since Mark convinced me I needed help with my moods. I paused, looking at the orange bottle. Did I even need these anymore? Had I ever? I tucked them into the bag anyway. I could figure that out later. My hands were shaking, but my mind was surprisingly clear. I needed documents: my birth certificate, passport, social security card. I pulled up the floorboard in the guest room closet where I'd hidden them years ago, along with $3,000 in cash. An emergency fund I'd been building secretly, $20 at a time from grocery money, cash back at the pharmacy, change from coffee runs. Not much, but enough for now. I also took the jewelry my grandmother had left me, the pieces that meant something beyond their monetary value, not the expensive, showy things Mark had given me on our anniversaries, always with a reminder of how much they cost. As I moved through the house, I felt like a ghost already, detached from this space that had never truly been mine. The furniture we'd argued over, the artwork he'd selected to elevate our taste, the spotless kitchen where I'd prepared countless meals he criticized, none of it mattered anymore. In my home office, I powered up my laptop and quickly transferred funds from our joint accounts to a private account I'd opened last year. Not everything. I wasn't a thief. Just my fair share. The money from my freelance graphic design work that Mark had always dismissed as your little hobby. I cleared my browsing history, then packed the laptop and charger. I hesitated at my desk drawer, then pulled it open to reveal my journals. 5 volumes spanning the years of our marriage, documenting everything. The early days when Mark's controlling behavior seemed like caring. The first time he'd thrown something at me, a TV remote that left a bruise on my thigh I'd hidden for weeks. The time his mother had witnessed him berating me over dinner and had simply continued eating her salmon. The nights I'd cried myself to sleep while he snored peacefully beside me. Those journals were coming with me. They were my proof, not just for anyone else who might need to see it someday, but for myself. Insurance against the moments of doubt I knew would come, when I might wonder if it was really that bad, or if I was overreacting. I looked at the clock, 10:13 a.m. Mark wouldn't be home until evening, but I didn't want to risk him coming back unexpectedly. I'd seen a news story once about a woman who'd planned her escape for months, only to have her husband walk in as she was loading the car. I couldn't let that happen. I pulled out my phone and called Lisa, my college roommate who lived in Portland, Maine. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. Another of Mark's subtle manipulations, gradually isolating me from anyone who cared about me. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Emily? Is that you?" Her voice brought tears to my eyes. "Lisa, I need help." There was no hesitation. "What do you need?" "I'm leaving Mark, today. Can I come to you?" "Yes," she said immediately. "God, yes." "Are you safe right now?" "He's at work. I just need to get out before he comes home." "Do you have a car?" I glanced out the window at my Audi in the driveway. A gift from Mark for our 5th anniversary. Purchased with our joint funds but registered in his name. Not one I can take. "I'm calling Tom at Maine Express Movers right now," she said, and I could hear her typing on another device. "He owes me a favor. They can have someone there in an hour. Pack what you can, text me the address, and sit tight." After we hung up, I sent her our address, then continued my preparations with renewed purpose. I walked through each room, taking only what I absolutely needed and what was undeniably mine. In the kitchen, I found my grandmother's cast-iron skillet that Mark had banished to the back of a cabinet, preferring his expensive copper cookware. The heavy pan felt right in my hands. Solid, durable, a connection to my past that predated him. At 11:30, a discreet white van pulled into our driveway. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and strong arms, introduced herself as Deb. She asked no questions as she helped me load my meager belongings into the van, just nodded when she saw my face and said, "You're doing the right thing, honey." Before leaving, I wrote a note on the kitchen counter, right next to where I left my house key. It simply read, "Thanks for the wake-up call." I considered writing more, explaining, justifying, even apologizing, but stopped myself. Those days were over. I took one final look around the house that had been my prison for 7 years. The perfect furniture, the tasteful art, the spotless surfaces, all of it suddenly seemed as hollow as the life I'd been living. I closed the door quietly behind me, hearing the soft click of the latch as a period at the end of a very long, painful sentence. As Deb drove us away from the neighborhood, I kept expecting to feel regret or fear. Instead, with each mile that separated me from that house and that life, I felt my shoulders relaxing, my breathing deepening. I leaned my head against the cool window glass and watched as familiar streets gave way to the highway. In the side mirror, Boston's skyline gradually receded, and with it, the person I'd been forced to become. First time I left my ex, I went back 3 times before it stuck, Deb said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Hope you're stronger than I was." I thought about the coffee burning my skin, about the years of slow erosion, about the shell of myself I'd almost accepted as permanent. "I won't be going back," I said, and for the first time in years, I recognized my own voice, clear, certain, and finally free. Lisa's cottage in Portland sat on a narrow strip of land that jutted out into Casco Bay. It was small, just 2 bedrooms and a sunroom that doubled as her yoga studio, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived in years. The first night, I slept for 14 hours straight, lulled by the distant sound of foghorns and the absence of walking on eggshells. When I finally emerged from the guest room the next morning, Lisa was sitting at her kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea and working on her laptop. She looked up when I appeared, her expression a careful mix of concern and relief. "There's coffee," she said, gesturing to the French press on the counter. "And I got those blueberry muffins you used to like from Standard Baking." The normalcy of it, the simple kindness of remembering what kind of muffins I liked, nearly undid me. I poured myself coffee with hands that trembled slightly, trying to gather myself. "Your face looks better," Lisa observed. "I put some aloe vera gel by your bed. Does it still hurt?" I touched my cheek gingerly. The redness had faded somewhat, but the skin was still tender and beginning to peel. "Not as much. Thanks for everything, Lisa. I mean it." "Don't thank me yet," she said, closing her laptop. "We need to talk about what happens next." What happened next turned out to be a crash course in disappearing. Lisa's brother-in-law was a lawyer who specialized in domestic abuse cases. He came over that afternoon, took one look at my face, and started making calls. By evening, I had an appointment with a doctor who would document my injuries, a meeting scheduled with a financial advisor who could help me untangle my finances from Mark's, and the contact information for a therapist who specialized in recovery from abusive relationships. "You need to decide how off-grid you want to go," Lisa explained as we sat on her deck that night, watching the lights from boats bobbing in the harbor. "Mark knows you know me. This will probably be the first place he looks." I hadn't thought that far ahead. The reality that Mark would come looking for me, not out of love, but out of a need to regain control, settled in my stomach like a stone. What are my options? Stay here and file for a restraining order, or disappear for a while until the legal stuff gets sorted, she said bluntly. I'd vote for option 2. Give yourself some space to breathe before you have to deal with him and his inevitable bullshit. The next morning, I used some of my emergency cash to buy a prepaid phone and a used laptop from a pawn shop. I called the credit card companies and banks where Mark and I had joint accounts, explaining that I was separating from my husband and needed to freeze the accounts. Some were helpful, others less so, but by the end of the day, I'd at least ensured that Mark couldn't drain what little money we had left. Lisa's lawyer brother-in-law, Paul, helped me file for an emergency restraining order based on the documented coffee incident and the pattern of financial and emotional abuse I described. When I showed him my journals, his expression darkened. "You've been keeping records all this time?" I nodded. I started writing things down so I could figure out if I was crazy or not. He was always telling me my memory was wrong, that things didn't happen the way I remembered them. "That's called gaslighting," Paul said, his voice gentle but firm. "And these journals are gold. Keep them safe." 3 days after I left Boston, Lisa received a call from Mark. I was in the shower when it happened, but I knew something was wrong as soon as I came downstairs. Lisa was pacing in the kitchen, her face tight with anger. "He called looking for you," she said without preamble. "Said you'd had a fight and he was worried sick. Said you'd been unstable lately and might hurt yourself." The familiar chill of Mark's manipulation crept up my spine. "What did you tell him?" "That I hadn't heard from you in months, which is sadly true thanks to him. But Emily, he's going to figure out you're here eventually. You need to move on." That afternoon we devised a plan. I would use my emergency credit card, the one Mark didn't know about, the one I'd opened in my maiden name for exactly this scenario, to rent a small seasonal cottage on the Maine coast. Lisa knew someone who knew someone, and by evening, I had an address and a key to a place in a tiny town called Searsport, about 2 hours up the coast. "It's nothing fancy," Lisa warned me. "These places are meant for summer people, but it's got heat and internet, and the owner says you can stay through winter if you want. Best of all, it's paid through a property management company, so there's no paper trail with your name on it." The next morning, I hugged Lisa goodbye, promising to check in regularly through a secure messaging app Paul had recommended. She pressed a can of pepper spray into my hand before I left. "Just in case," she said, her eyes serious. "I don't think he'll find you, but Mark doesn't give up easily," I finished for her. We both knew it was true. The drive up the coast was surreal. Each mile marker seemed to put not just physical distance between me and my old life, but emotional distance as well. I stopped in Belfast for groceries, paying cash, keeping my head down, still expecting to see Mark's face around every corner. By the time I reached Searsport, my knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and my back ached with tension. The cottage sat on a bluff overlooking Penobscot Bay, a small weathered cedar-shingled structure with a screened porch and a stone chimney. The October wind whipped around me as I unlocked the door, carrying the scent of salt and pine. Inside it was basic but clean, A main room with a kitchenette and seating area, a tiny bedroom, and a bathroom with a shower stall barely big enough to turn around in. The furniture was mismatched and worn, nothing like the carefully curated pieces in Mark's house. I loved it immediately. That first night, I built a fire in the small wood stove, wrapped myself in a blanket I found in the bedroom closet, and sat on the porch watching the moon rise over the water. The vastness of the bay, the endless rhythm of the waves, the star-filled sky, all of it reminded me how small my problems were in the grand scheme of things. Not unimportant, but manageable. For the first time since I could remember, I felt something like peace. Days passed, then weeks. I established a simple routine: walking on the beach in the mornings, working remotely on freelance graphic design projects in the afternoons, cooking simple meals, reading books from the town's tiny library. I stopped checking over my shoulder constantly. I started sleeping through the night. The locals were curious but respectful, in that particular New England way that values privacy above all else. I gave them a modified version of the truth. I was going through a divorce, needed some space to figure things out. No one pressed for details. To them, I was just Emily from away, another wounded soul seeking healing in the embrace of the Maine coast. One rainy afternoon in November, I found myself staring at a blank canvas I'd purchased on a rare trip into Bangor. I hadn't painted since college. Mark had dismissed my artwork as amateur early in our relationship, and I'd eventually packed away my supplies. But something about the gray sky meeting the darker gray sea outside my window demanded to be captured. My first attempts were hesitant, awkward, but as the days shortened and winter settled in, I found myself painting more and more, not just seascapes, but abstract expressions of my journey. Canvases of dark, suffocating colors giving way to lighter, more open spaces. A series of self-portraits that began with a woman whose features were blurred and indistinct, gradually becoming clearer and more defined. During this time, I maintained careful contact with Lisa and Paul. Mark had indeed come looking for me in Portland, arriving at Lisa's door unannounced one evening, all concern and charm. When she maintained she hadn't seen me, he'd grown cold, then threatening. She'd called the police, who escorted him away with a warning. After that, he'd switched tactics, filing a missing persons report and telling anyone who would listen that I was mentally unstable and had abandoned him. "He's burning through money like crazy," Paul reported during one of our secure calls. "Hired a private investigator, took out ads in newspapers up and down the East Coast. He's telling people you emptied your joint accounts before disappearing, which is rich coming from a guy who's been systematically draining your finances for years. Do you think he'll find me?" I asked, trying to keep the fear from my voice. "Honestly, no. You've been smart. Cash only, no social media, new phone, different name. Unless you reach out to someone from your old life or he gets incredibly lucky, you should be fine." As winter deepened, I found unexpected strength in isolation. The bitter cold, the early darkness, the howling nor'easters that sometimes cut power to the cottage for days. All of it felt like a test I was finally equipped to pass. I chopped my own firewood, figured out which neighbors I could trust for help when the generator wouldn't start, learned to sit with my own thoughts without drowning in them. Sometimes, in the evenings, I'd touch the faint scars on my cheek, the last physical reminder of that final morning with Mark, and try to reconcile the woman I'd been then with the woman I was becoming. The burns had healed, leaving only the slightest discoloration, visible only if you knew where to look. Like so many of the wounds Mark had inflicted, they had faded, but not disappeared entirely. On Christmas morning, I woke to the first real snowfall of the season. The world outside my window was transformed, pristine, silent, beautiful in its stark simplicity. I made coffee and took it out to the porch, wrapped in a quilt, watching the snow continue to fall on the bay. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, a simple heart emoji, our code that all was well. I sent back a snowflake in response, then set the phone aside. Later, I would call her properly, and we would talk about the future, the divorce proceedings Paul was preparing to initiate, the small but growing savings account I was building, the possibility of me showing my paintings at a gallery in Brunswick that spring. But for now, I simply sat, breathing in the cold, clean air, feeling the weight of my own solitude, not as a burden but as a gift. I had vanished not into nothingness, but into possibility. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was excited to see what might come next. Mark Hudson's day had gone exceptionally well. The meeting with the Richardson account had landed him the praise he felt he deserved, and the executive team had practically fawned over his presentation. He'd celebrated with a 3-martini lunch at Sorellina, with colleagues who laughed at all his jokes and nodded at all his opinions. By the time he pulled into the driveway of his Brookline home at 8:17 p.m., he was riding the high that came from a day of being right about everything. His good mood evaporated the moment he opened the front door. The house was dark. No lamps lit in the entryway. No dinner smells wafting from the kitchen. No sound of Emily moving around upstairs. Usually, she'd be waiting with dinner prepared exactly as he liked it, not daring to eat until he arrived. "Emily?" His voice echoed in the empty foyer. He flipped on lights as he moved through the house, irritation building with each empty room he encountered. The kitchen was spotless. No dinner preparations in sight. The dining room table wasn't set. When he checked his watch, 8:22 p.m., his annoyance crystallized into anger. He'd told her to have dinner ready by 8. Where the hell was she? He pulled out his phone, dialing Emily's number as he yanked open the refrigerator door looking for something to eat. Nothing but condiments, some wilting vegetables, and a 6-pack of the craft beer he liked. The call went straight to voicemail. "Emily, it's me. Where are you? Call me back immediately." He hung up and slammed the refrigerator door shut. That's when he noticed the house key sitting on the kitchen counter, next to a small folded piece of paper. He picked it up, unfolding it to read the 5 words written in Emily's neat handwriting. "Thanks for the wake-up call." The note made no sense to him at first. Wake-up call? What was she talking about? Then the memory of that morning surfaced. The coffee, her refusal, her burned face. He crumpled the note in his fist. She was being dramatic, as usual. Probably at her sister's place in Newton, licking her wounds, expecting him to chase after her with apologies. He went upstairs to change out of his work clothes, still fuming. In the bedroom, he opened his closet to hang up his suit jacket and froze. Emily's side of the closet was half empty. Her favorite jeans were gone, along with most of her casual clothes. But her expensive dresses, the ones he'd selected for her to wear to his work functions, still hung neatly in a row. His heart rate accelerated as he yanked open her dresser drawers. Underwear, gone. T-shirts, gone. He stormed into the bathroom. Her toothbrush was missing, along with her face wash and moisturizer. But the expensive anti-aging serums he'd bought her for Christmas remained untouched. Mark sat heavily on the edge of the bed, trying to process what he was seeing. Emily hadn't just gone to her sister's for the night. She had packed. She had left. The thought was so foreign it took him several moments to fully grasp it. He dialed her number again, straight to voicemail. He called her sister Karen, trying to keep his voice calm and concerned. "Karen, it's Mark. Is Emily with you?" "No," Karen replied, her tone instantly wary. "Why would she be? We had a little disagreement this morning. I thought she might have gone to cool off at your place." "I haven't heard from Emily in weeks," Karen said, and Mark could hear the suspicion in her voice. "What kind of disagreement?" "Nothing serious," he said smoothly. "Just a misunderstanding about finances. If you hear from her, tell her to call me, okay?" He hung up before Karen could ask more questions. The panic began to set in then. Mark systematically searched the house, looking for clues about where Emily might have gone. In her small home office, he found that her laptop was missing, along with the framed photo of her parents that usually sat on her desk. The bottom drawer where she kept her journals was empty. When he checked their bank accounts online, he discovered that Emily had transferred nearly $45,000 from their joint savings and checking accounts to an unknown destination. His credit cards were still in his wallet, but when he called to check the balances, he found that their joint cards had been frozen at Emily's request. As the reality of the situation sank in, Mark's panic gave way to cold fury. How dare she? After everything he'd done for her, rescuing her from her boring life, elevating her taste, introducing her to the right people, this was how she repaid him? By stealing his money and disappearing like a thief in the night? He spent the next several hours calling everyone they knew, Her friends from college, whom she rarely saw anymore, neighbors who might have noticed her leaving, even his own mother, though he knew Emily would never go to Eleanor for help. No one had seen or heard from her, or at least that's what they claimed. Mark wasn't sure he believed them. The way some of them asked pointed questions about why Emily had left. Had something happened? Was she okay? Made him suspect they knew more than they were saying. By midnight, exhausted and still hungry, Mark opened one of his craft beers and slumped onto the couch, trying to think clearly. Emily couldn't have vanished into thin air. She had to be somewhere. With someone. She didn't have many resources of her own. He'd made sure of that over the years, keeping their finances tightly controlled. The image of Emily's singed face flashed in his mind. Maybe he'd gone too far this morning. But she'd pushed him to it, being so stubborn about the credit card. If she'd just given in, like she usually did, none of this would have happened. He took out his phone again and searched for recent calls to her number. There weren't many. Emily didn't have much of a social life beyond him. But one name caught his eye. Lisa Brennan. Her college roommate, the environmental lawyer from Maine who Mark had always disliked. Emily had called her 3 days ago, around the time she'd claimed to be grocery shopping. Mark smiled grimly to himself. Lisa's place in Portland. That had to be where Emily was hiding. He'd drive up there tomorrow, explain the situation, bring his wayward wife home where she belonged. He'd be understanding at first, forgive her little rebellion. Then, once they were home, he'd make sure she understood the consequences of her actions. He set his alarm for 6 a.m. and tried to sleep, but rest eluded him. The house felt wrong without Emily in it. Too quiet, too empty. He hadn't realized how accustomed he'd become to her presence, always in the background of his life, meeting his needs before he had to ask, absorbing his moods without complaint. The next morning, bleary-eyed and irritable, Mark drove the 2 hours to Portland, rehearsing what he would say to Emily. He'd be reasonable, compassionate even. He'd remind her of all they'd built together, how lost she'd be without him. She'd been on her own for a day now. Surely she'd realized her mistake already. Lisa's small cottage sat on a narrow road near the water. Mark parked his BMW at the curb and straightened his tie before ringing the doorbell. A long moment passed before Lisa opened the door, her expression hardening when she saw who it was. Mark. What a surprise. Hello, Lisa. I'm here for Emily. Lisa crossed her arms. Emily's not here. Don't lie to me, he said, struggling to keep his voice pleasant. I know she called you. Let me talk to my wife. I haven't seen Emily in almost a year, Lisa said. Thanks to you, I might add. Mark tried to peer past her into the house. Emily, he called out. Emily, it's me. Whatever you think I did, we can work it out. She's not here, Mark, Lisa repeated firmly. And even if I did know where she was, I wouldn't tell you. Now please leave before I call the police. The mention of police caught him off guard. The police? What for? I'm just looking for my wife, who's clearly having some kind of breakdown. I'm worried about her. Are you? Because that burn on her face when she left you tells a different story. Mark's blood ran cold. So Emily had been here. She told you about our little disagreement, did she? I'm sure she left out the part where she refused to help my mother, or how she's been increasingly unstable lately. Leave, Mark. Now. When he tried to push past her into the house, Lisa shoved him back with surprising strength, then slammed the door in his face. Through the wood, he heard her voice. I'm calling the police now, Mark. Furious but unwilling to risk a confrontation with local police, Mark returned to his car. As he sat there, watching Lisa's house for any sign of Emily, his phone rang. It was Eleanor. Mark, darling. What's this I hear about Emily leaving? Mrs. Patterson next door just called me, all concerned about you being alone. Mark winced. The neighborhood gossip mill was already working overtime. It's nothing, Mother. Emily's having a bit of a tantrum. She'll be back soon. Well, I hope so. Though between us, I never thought she was quite right for you. Too ordinary. But she did know how to keep a nice home. I'll give her that. By the time Mark returned to Boston that evening, having found no trace of Emily in Portland, news of their separation had spread throughout their social circle. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and colleagues, all claiming to be concerned but clearly hungry for details. Mark's carefully constructed image of the perfect husband with the perfect life was beginning to crack. The next morning, he hired a private investigator recommended by a partner at his firm. The man, a former Boston PD detective named Gallagher, listened impassively as Mark spun a tale of Emily's increasing instability, her reckless spending, her baseless accusations of mistreatment. "She's taken a significant amount of money from our accounts," Mark explained, showing him the bank statements. "I'm worried she might hurt herself. She's been on medication for anxiety, not always taking it consistently." Gallagher nodded, making notes. "Any idea where she might have gone? Family? Friends?" "I've checked the obvious places," Mark said, not mentioning his failed confrontation with Lisa. "She's cut contact with most of her friends over the years. Became something of a homebody." "Your wife's maiden name?" "Reynolds. Emily Ann Reynolds. Any chance she'd use that name now? Credit cards? Hotel registrations?" Mark hadn't considered that possibility. "I suppose she might." As Gallagher continued his questioning, Mark felt a growing sense of unease. The more he talked about Emily, her habits, her lack of close friendships, her financial dependence on him, the more he realized how thoroughly he'd isolated her over the years. It had never seemed calculated in the moment. He'd simply wanted her all to himself, away from influences that might make her question his authority. Now, that very isolation made her impossible to track. The Emily he knew wouldn't have had the resources or courage to truly disappear, but maybe he'd never really known her at all. 2 weeks after I disappeared, the first legal papers arrived at the house in Brookline. I wasn't there to see Mark's reaction, of course, but Paul described it to me later in delicious detail during one of our secure calls. "The process server caught him just as he was leaving for work," Paul said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "According to my guy, your husband went through all 5 stages of grief in about 30 seconds. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Though he might have gotten stuck in the anger phase. I was sitting on my cottage porch, wrapped in a thick blanket against the December chill, watching a pair of loons dive in the bay. The contrast between my peaceful surroundings and the chaos unfolding in Boston wasn't lost on me. "What exactly did you send him?" I asked. "A 3-course meal," Paul replied. "Appetizer, the restraining order, complete with photographs of your burns and medical documentation. Main course, divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences and a pattern of abuse. Dessert, a separate civil suit for financial restitution, emotional damages, and medical costs." My stomach tightened. Even hearing Mark's name still triggered a physical response, a reflexive fear I was working to overcome. "How long before he responds?" "He has 20 days to answer the divorce complaint. As for the restraining order, there's a hearing scheduled for next week. You don't have to attend. I'll represent you. The civil suit can proceed alongside the divorce, but those wheels turn more slowly." I took a deep breath of salt air. "And what is he likely to do? Based on what you've told me about him? He'll fight. Men like your husband don't surrender control easily." Paul's prediction proved accurate. Mark hired Thornton Gable, one of Boston's most aggressive divorce attorneys, known for representing wealthy men against gold-digging wives. Their initial response was to paint me as mentally unstable, claiming I had abandoned the marriage without cause and stolen joint assets. "It's exactly what we expected," Paul reassured me when I called him in a panic after receiving his update. "They're posturing. Notice they didn't contest the restraining order? That's because they know the evidence is too strong. The coffee incident alone is enough to justify it." As December gave way to January, I found myself caught in a strange limbo. My days in Searsport were peaceful. I continued painting, took long walks on the frozen beach, made tentative friendships with a few locals. But every few days I'd receive updates from Paul about legal maneuvers happening in a life that increasingly felt like it belonged to someone else. Mark had canceled all my credit cards, including ones in my name alone. He'd tried to report my car stolen, until the police reminded him it was registered in his name, and technically he'd been the one to abandon it in the driveway. He'd even called my parents in Arizona, spinning a tale of my mental breakdown and begging them to contact him if they heard from me. Thankfully, my parents had never warmed to Mark. My father, a retired high school principal with an unerring sense for bullies, had seen through Mark's charm at our first meeting. After confirming I was safe, though I wouldn't tell them exactly where, they refused to help him, and instead provided statements to Paul, documenting the changes they'd observed in me over the years of my marriage. "Your father wrote that in the last year he barely recognized you on video calls," Paul told me. "Said you'd lost the spark in your eyes, jumped whenever your phone buzzed, and seemed to check with Mark before answering any question." Powerful stuff. In mid-January, Mark's strategy shifted. Realizing the unstable wife narrative wasn't gaining traction, he suddenly became conciliatory, offering a generous settlement if I would drop the civil suit and agree to a quick, quiet divorce. "He's feeling the pressure," Paul explained during our weekly call. "The partner track at his firm is extremely image-conscious. A messy divorce with abuse allegations isn't the look they want. Plus, the temporary restraining order was extended yesterday for another 6 months. I considered the offer for all of 5 seconds. No deal. That's my girl," Paul said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Ready to up the ante?" The next phase of our strategy involved financial forensics. With the court's permission, Paul hired an accountant to examine our marital finances going back 7 years. What they uncovered was revelatory even to me. Mark had been systematically diverting funds from our joint accounts into private investments in his name only. He'd been hiding income from freelance consulting work, underreporting his bonuses, and claiming deductions for business expenses that were actually gifts for his mother or luxury items for himself. Most damningly, the investigation uncovered a pattern of financial abuse. Mark had gradually taken control of all my earnings, limited my access to our joint funds through arbitrary allowances, and deliberately kept me in the dark about our financial situation while building his own separate safety net. "This changes everything," Paul said when the report was complete. "Financial abuse is still abuse, and the courts are increasingly recognizing it as such. Plus, he's potentially committed tax fraud, which gives us additional leverage." Armed with this new evidence, Paul filed an amended complaint, seeking not just equitable division of our marital assets, but a larger share to compensate for Mark's deliberate financial manipulation. We also requested specific assets, including the Brookline house, be preserved pending the outcome of the case. Mark's response was swift and vicious. He hired a private investigator to track me down, placed ads in newspapers across New England asking for information about my whereabouts, and even created a website claiming I had stolen money from him and disappeared. When those efforts failed, he began liquidating assets, selling stocks, emptying investment accounts, even putting the house on the market, in a transparent attempt to hide funds before the court could divide them. "Big mistake," Paul said when he called to tell me about Mark's latest moves. "The judge has frozen everything and appointed a receiver to oversee the marital estate. Mark's been ordered to account for every penny he's moved in the last 30 days, or face contempt charges." February brought the first face-to-face confrontation, though thankfully not with Mark himself. The court ordered mediation as a first step, with Paul representing me via secure video link, while Mark and his attorney attended in person. I sat in Lisa's living room in Portland, having temporarily left my Searsport hideaway for the meeting, watching on her laptop as Paul systematically dismantled every argument Mark's attorney made. "Mrs. Hudson has provided extensive documentation of physical, emotional, and financial abuse," Paul stated calmly, displaying photos of my burned face on the split screen. "She left the marital home in fear for her safety after Mr. Hudson assaulted her with hot coffee and threatened her with homelessness if she didn't comply with his financial demands." Mark's attorney, a sleek man with silver hair and a perpetual frown, leaned forward. "Mr. Hudson admits to losing his temper during an argument, but denies any pattern of abuse. Mrs. Hudson's disappearance and her refusal to disclose her current location suggests she's the one with something to hide." I watched Mark on the screen, his face impassive except for a subtle tightening around his mouth. The expression I knew meant he was furious, but trying to appear reasonable. He wore his most expensive suit, and had clearly gotten a fresh haircut. "Always image-conscious, my husband." Paul smiled thinly. "My client's location remains confidential precisely because of Mr. Hudson's history of controlling and abusive behavior. As for what she has to hide, perhaps you'd like to explain the journals." The mediator, a retired judge with shrewd eyes, leaned forward. "Journals?" Paul nodded and slid a thick file across the table. 7 years of contemporaneous documentation of Mr. Hudson's abuse, written by my client. Dates, times, specific incidents, all recorded within 24 hours of occurrence. I've provided certified copies for the court's review. Mark's face drained of color as he whispered urgently to his attorney. I knew what they were discussing. The journals contained everything. Not just the coffee incident, but years of verbal cruelty, instances of isolation from friends and family, financial manipulation, and a half-dozen accidents that weren't accidents at all. A pushed fall down the stairs that resulted in a sprained wrist. A playful shove that sent me into a glass coffee table. A car door slammed on my hand during an argument. The mediation ended without resolution, which Paul assured me was expected. Mediation was just a formality in this case, he explained later. The real purpose was to let Mark know exactly what evidence we have and give him a chance to settle before this gets truly ugly in open court. March arrived with shifting winds, both meteorological and legal. As the ice began to break up in Penobscot Bay, cracks also appeared in Mark's legal strategy. His attorney approached Paul with a revised settlement offer, substantially more generous than the first. He's offering the house, half of all identified marital assets, and a lump sum for emotional damages, Paul told me. In exchange, he wants the civil suit dropped and a confidentiality agreement preventing you from discussing the abuse publicly. I considered the offer while walking along the rocky shoreline near my cottage, watching seabirds return from their winter migrations. The financial terms were fair, maybe even favorable, but the silence, that was what Mark had counted on for years. My silence had protected him, maintained his image, allowed the abuse to continue. No confidentiality agreement, I told Paul that evening. I won't be silenced anymore. 2 days later, Mark's attorney called again. The new offer, everything from before, but without the confidentiality clause. Mark's only condition was that we finalize the divorce quickly and with minimal publicity. This time, I accepted. The final divorce decree was issued in early April, just as the first crocuses were pushing through the thawing ground around my cottage. I didn't attend the hearing. Paul represented me while I remained in Searsport, standing on my porch with my phone pressed to my ear as the judge made her ruling. The court finds clear and convincing evidence of a pattern of abusive behavior by the respondent, the judge stated. Therefore, the petitioner's requests for equitable distribution of assets are granted in full, with additional consideration for the documented financial misconduct. I listened as she detailed the settlement, the house in Brookline, which I plan to sell immediately, half of our investment accounts and retirement funds, a portion of Mark's future earnings for the next 5 years as rehabilitative alimony, and a separate award for medical expenses and emotional distress. Most importantly, the permanent restraining order was granted, prohibiting Mark from contacting me directly or indirectly, or coming within 500 feet of me, my residence, or my workplace. When the call ended, I stood for a long time watching the bay, feeling oddly hollow. I had won, completely, irrevocably won. The legal system, which so often fails women in my position, had worked for me. I had the resources to rebuild my life, the freedom to live without fear, the validation of having my experience recognized and believed. Yet part of me mourned for the years lost, the person I might have become without Mark's systematic erosion of my sense of self. I thought about the young woman who had met him at a gallery opening in Cambridge, full of dreams and confidence, and how methodically he had dismantled her, piece by piece. That evening, I built a driftwood fire on the beach and watched the flames dance against the darkening sky. I had brought my journals with me, the physical evidence of years of suffering. Paul had assured me they were no longer needed. He had certified copies for any future legal proceedings. One by one, I fed the pages to the fire, watching my handwriting curl and blacken, then disintegrate into ash. Not to protect Mark, but to free myself from the weight of those memories. As the last page burned away, I felt something shift within me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a loosening of the grip those years had held on my heart. The legal storm had passed. Now it was time to see what would grow in its wake. Spring came to coastal Maine, not with a dramatic flourish, but with a series of small surrenders. The snow retreated inch by inch, revealing muddy ground dotted with the first tentative green shoots. The bay lost its gray winter pallor, returning to deep blues that shifted with the changing sky. Slowly, the world softened, and with it, Something in me began to thaw as well. With the divorce finalized and my financial future secure, I faced a question I hadn't considered in years. What did I want? Not what would keep the peace, not what would please someone else, but what would make me, Emily, happy. The answer came while I was cleaning my brushes after a day of painting. I wanted to stay in Maine. Not necessarily in this exact cottage, which had served its purpose as a temporary refuge, but somewhere along this rugged coastline that had sheltered me when I needed it most. I wanted to continue painting, not as therapy now, but as passion. And I wanted to find a way to help others who had lived through what I had. In late April, I ventured into Belfast, a small city about 20 minutes from Searsport. For the first time since leaving Boston, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, wasn't hiding. The restraining order against Mark gave me a sense of security I'd almost forgotten was possible. At a real estate office on Main Street, I met with an agent named Diane, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with a thick Maine accent and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Looking to rent or buy?" she asked after I'd explained I wanted something permanent in the area. "Buy," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Something small, maybe with a studio space. Walking distance to water would be nice, but not essential." Diane studied me over the rim of her reading glasses. "You're from away, as we say here. What brings you to Mid-Coast Maine?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I came here to escape an abusive marriage. Found myself instead." She nodded once. No pity in her expression, just understanding. "Well, property ain't cheap on the coast, but it's not Boston prices either. Let's see what we can find for you." 3 weeks and 7 house tours later, I found it. A former boat builder's home in a small town called Northport, just south of Belfast. Built in the 1920s, it had weathered cedar shingles, a deep front porch facing Penobscot Bay, and an attached workshop that had once housed shipbuilding tools, but would make a perfect art studio. The house needed work: new windows, updated plumbing, a roof that wouldn't make it through another winter. But the moment I walked in, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a home for years: possibility. "It's a project," Diane warned as we stood in the kitchen with its outdated appliances and worn linoleum floor. "Probably looking at 6 months of renovations before it's properly livable." "I'll take it," I said, tracing my fingers along the worn wooden countertop. "It's got good bones." I closed on the house in June, using part of my divorce settlement for the purchase and setting aside the rest for renovations. Paul had helped me establish a trust to manage the funds, ensuring that even if Mark somehow found me, he couldn't touch my finances again. The renovation process became a metaphor for my own rebuilding. I hired local contractors, but insisted on being involved in every decision, learning about load-bearing walls and electrical systems, choosing fixtures and finishes that pleased me, rather than following someone else's vision. I kept the elements of the house that had character: the wide plank pine floors, the hand-carved banister, the built-in bookshelves, and replaced what was broken or worn beyond repair. As the house transformed, I began putting down roots in the community. I joined a local painters collective, started shopping at the farmers market, where I slowly became a familiar face rather than a stranger, and even adopted a 3-legged cat from the animal shelter, naming him Bowie for his resilience and balance. In August, as the renovation neared completion, Lisa came to visit from Portland. We sat on my newly rebuilt porch, drinking wine and watching the sunset paint the bay in shades of gold and pink. "I almost didn't recognize you," she said, studying me over the rim of her glass. "You move differently now. Stand straighter." I smiled, knowing she was right. The physical changes were subtle. I'd let my hair grow longer and curl naturally instead of straightening it as Mark had preferred, had gained back some of the weight his constant criticism had caused me to lose. But the bigger transformation was internal, a reclaiming of space and voice that showed in everything from my posture to my laugh. "How much does he know?" I asked. We rarely discussed Mark directly, but his shadow had grown smaller with time. "Not much," Lisa replied. "Paul says he's moved to Chicago. Took a job with a different firm after his partnership track stalled in Boston. The divorce and the rumors around it did some damage to his reputation." I nodded, surprised by my lack of satisfaction at this news. Once, I might have celebrated any setback in Mark's life. Now, I I found I simply didn't care. His life was his own problem, just as mine was finally, completely my own joy. That fall, the director of the Belfast Arts Centre saw my work at a local show and invited me to teach a workshop. "Your paintings have something special," she told me. "A journey from darkness to light that speaks to people." I designed a 6-week course called Art as Healing, open to anyone but particularly aimed at survivors of trauma. I wasn't a therapist, and made that clear from the start, but I could share what painting had given me: a voice when words failed, a way to externalize feelings too complex for language, a path back to myself. The first session, I expected maybe 5 or 6 participants. 15 showed up, women mostly, ranging in age from a college student with haunted eyes to a grandmother with arthritic hands that trembled but still created beauty. Not all were domestic violence survivors. Some had endured other traumas, from combat experiences to childhood abuse to grief. But all were seeking the same thing: a way forward. "I'm not going to tell you art will fix everything," I said that first day, standing before my nervous class in the studio space I'd rented downtown. "It won't erase what happened to you, but it might help you carry it differently. It might give you a place to put the feelings that are too big to keep inside." I shared my own story, briefly but honestly, showed them my early paintings from the cottage, dark, chaotic canvases full of confusion and pain, and my more recent work, still complex, but shot through with light, with possibility. Then I gave them each a canvas and said, "Start anywhere. There's no wrong way to do this." The workshop became a weekly appointment. Then a second session was added by popular demand. Then a third. Word spread beyond Belfast, bringing participants from as far away as Bangor and Augusta. By winter, the Arts Centre offered me a permanent position as their trauma-informed arts instructor, with a dedicated studio space and the freedom to design my own curriculum. Around the same time, a small gallery in Camden offered to host a solo show of my work. I called it Reconstruction. 15 paintings chronicling my journey from the dark days of my marriage, through the escape, and into my new life. I didn't use Mark's name in the artist's statement, didn't sensationalize the abuse, but I didn't hide it either. "These paintings document one woman's journey from silence to voice," I wrote, "from a life constrained by another's vision to one expanded by her own." The opening night of the show, the gallery was packed with faces both familiar and new. My parents flew in from Arizona, tears in their eyes as they moved from canvas to canvas. Lisa brought champagne and a group of her environmental lawyer friends. Locals from Northport and Belfast came to support their newest resident artist. Late in the evening, a woman approached me, middle-aged, well-dressed, with elegantly graying hair and an uncertain smile. "Your work is extraordinary," she said, "especially this one." She gestured to a large canvas I'd titled Morning After, an abstract rendering of that first dawn after I'd left Mark, all shattered patterns and tentative light breaking through dark spaces. "Thank you," I replied. "It's a favorite of mine, too." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "How did you find the courage? To leave, I mean." I studied her face, recognizing something in her expression I'd seen in my own mirror for years. "It wasn't one moment of enormous courage," I told her. "It was 1,000 tiny moments of choosing myself, until finally there was no other choice left." She nodded, blinking rapidly against tears. I took one of my business cards from my pocket, simple white cards with my name and the address of my studio at the Arts Centre, and pressed it into her hand. "The next workshop starts in January," I said softly. "Tuesday evenings. No experience necessary." She slipped the card into her purse with a grateful nod, then disappeared into the crowd. I didn't know if she would come. Many didn't, trapped in the same cycles of hope and despair that had kept me with Mark for so long. But some did come, arriving nervous and apologetic, leaving a little straighter, a little more certain. And some of those returned, week after week, rebuilding themselves stroke by stroke, color by color. On the anniversary of the day I left, that morning when hot coffee and cold cruelty had finally broken something loose in me, I woke before dawn and drove to a small beach near my house. The January air was bitter cold, the sky still dark except for a thin line of gray at the horizon. I wrapped myself in a down jacket and sat on a driftwood log, waiting. As the first light broke over the water, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. Burned, frightened, running for her life. I thought about the woman I was now, scarred but stronger, rooted in a community that valued her, doing work that mattered. The distance between those two versions of myself seemed both vast and vanishingly small. I took out the small sketchbook I'd brought and began to draw the sunrise, not trying to capture its literal appearance but the feeling it evoked. Hope, possibility, the surprise of beauty after darkness. Simple lines, bold colors, a composition that drew the eye forward rather than back. Later that day, I would teach a workshop, have dinner with friends, sleep in a house that belonged entirely to me. Ordinary activities that had once seemed impossible. A life rebuilt from ruins. The sky lightened from gray to pink to gold, the colors reflecting on the still water. I stopped drawing and simply watched as another day began. Not the first day of my new life, not anymore, but one in a continuing series of days that belonged to me. Days I had claimed through that single word, okay, and everything that came after. The sun cleared the horizon, full and bright against the winter sky. I closed my sketchbook, stood up, and headed home, walking easily in my own footsteps, steady on the path I'd chosen,